Hello, D2 football fans, and welcome back to round two of the Super Region 1 playoff podcast. I'm D2Football.com national columnist Chuck Bitner. With me again this week is PSAC columnist Cary Moyer. In this Inside D2 Football special, we'll briefly recap what happened this past week in round one, and we'll look ahead to what's on tap for round two. Cary, before we kind of launch into the games, I wanted to mention something that really kind of resonated with me this past week. I was watching the post-game press conferences from around the country, and something that Charleston coach Quinn Sanders said just really kind of struck a chord with me. He was talking about how much he was looking forward to celebrating Thanksgiving with his team, and just how special that would be for them as a group. And it just kind of reminded me how special it is for teams to still be playing football after Thanksgiving, because it's not something that happens every year. And normally it's kind of the time of year where teams are kind of dispersing until the spring. They kind of have their end of the season meetings. You have the Thanksgiving break, you come back and you've kind of got a couple weeks in that final push to get through your exams. And then that's kind of it until the spring semester. So for these teams that are playing coming up in this round, it's a pretty special experience for them.
Definitely. And, obviously, football's been a huge part of my life, and, played 14 years, third grade all the way through 4 years in college, coached high school, coached college, coached pro arena. But, looking back to my high school days, we had Thanksgiving Day game, of course, here in Pennsylvania now with the, what everybody, more similar to the college scene is, the playoffs. And of course, here in Pennsylvania with Pennsylvania high school football having the 6 classifications, there's a lot of teams playing beyond Thanksgiving now. So, again, it's just great to be with your teammates, to be with, your coaches, whatever level you're at. And I know it's a big deal, and here, I'm in the Reading area, and YMSC is always in the playoffs. They have their practices open on Thanksgiving Day. It's kind of a community event, folks come out. But for these college teams, a lot of folks are going home for Thanksgiving break, but to still be on campus and practicing, it's an awesome feeling.
Yeah, I know a lot of teams kind of make a tradition then out of having like a Thursday morning practice on Thanksgiving. A lot of times they, invite families to come to them because they're not going home, and it ends up being a really cool atmosphere and just a cool thing for them. So let's actually take a look at all the teams that are still playing this coming weekend after Thanksgiving. So we'll kind of go through these real quickly, region by region, just so we can see everybody that's still playing. But here's the snapshot from the national level. And one thing I do want to point out about this, because we're in Super Region 1, those are the teams that we're focusing on. I just want to remind everyone that just because you see a graphic like this or see the full page bracket in the structure, do remember that by the time we get down to the regional finals and going into the national semifinals, it's not necessarily set who the Super Region 1 champion will play at that point. They will reseed the teams and pair 1 with 4 and 3 with 2. So it's not necessarily a given which other regional champion our SR1 champ will face at that point. So let's actually drill down another level. We'll come back to Super Region 1 because that's where we're going to focus our conversation. But we'll start looking at the Super Region 2 part of the bracket, and we'll go through these quickly. Boy, Cary, our team that got displaced from Super Region 1 to SR2, the Shepherd Rams, the defending SR1 champs, I think you and I both felt that they had a pretty good chance to go down there and possibly win that game at Lenoir-Rhyne. And boy, it just did not turn out that way at all.
No, it didn't. And, of course, the final score, 63-17. And I talked a little bit about it on last week's show, having been down at Lenoir-Rhyne a decade ago for the semifinal game when Westchester was down there, and talked about it being in the mud. And, that team was running triple option and ran 70 plays from scrimmage, all run plays. Obviously, the 2023 Lenoir-Rhyne team is built very different, and I think they actually set a single game passing record in this game. So very much more a balanced attack, and got to tip the cap to Lenoir-Rhyne. They took care of business at home. Great atmosphere down there for them, and their efforts get them a shot at number 1 Benedict in Super Region 2.
Yeah, the Bears scored touchdowns on their first 4 possessions of both halves, which is not something that we normally see happen to a Shepherd Rams defense. So, a bit of a humbling loss, but when your season goes 8-3 with a playoff appearance, or I guess it's 9-3, the playoff appearance, when that's a down season, you're doing pretty well with your program. So we know that the Rams will be back next year. Elsewhere in the region, Delta State avenged their only regular season loss with a massive beatdown of West Florida. Delta State really just kind of jumped out on top of the Argos and ran away with that. It was 35-0 at the half. I watched all that game last Sunday morning, and boy, just an impressive display for Delta State. And Valdosta State, coming off a really disappointing 5-6 season, they've got to share the Gulf South Conference Championship and now a first-round playoff win, and they get a shot now to avenge their only loss of the season, going to Delta State to see if they can take down the Statesmen. In Super Region 3, Pittsburgh State, a little bit of a struggle with Indianapolis. That game was tighter than we thought it might be. The Greyhounds hung around, but the Gorillas did pull away in the fourth quarter and won that one 35-14. Of course, the big one that really had a lot of attention, a lot of eyeballs on it from around the country, Grand Valley State hosting the two-time defending national champs, Ferris State. It looked like Grand Valley was going to pull away and actually win this one by 2 scores in the fourth quarter. A little bit of drama in the last half minute actually allowed Ferris State to get a late score and an onside kick. It actually came down to a Hail Mary on the last play of the game, but Grand Valley does get the win. And Central Missouri really had no trouble at all with Henderson State. The Mules just have an offense that's rolling. They have the player that I think is likely the leading candidate to win the Harlan Hill Trophy, Zach Zabrowski. Just another massive day, 7 touchdowns in that game. The Mules now take on the number 1 seed in Super Region 3, Harding, coming up on Saturday. And deeping into Super Region 4, this was the only region, Cary, where we had a couple of upsets. We had unseeded teams take down the number 2 and 3 seeds. Bemidji State held that high-flying UT Permian Basin offense to just 3 points. It was actually a shutout for most of the game. And Central Washington took Western Colorado to overtime, won that one with a walk-off touchdown in the bottom half of the first OT period. And then Minnesota State actually had a lot of trouble just hanging with a very inspired Augustana team. Augie beats the Minnesota State Mavericks for the second time this year. They now move on to face Colorado School of Mines. So that's the action from outside of Super Region 1. Cary, anything that stood out to you among the teams and the games in the other brackets?
Well, I think one of the big things here, especially for the PSAC fans, is with the Super Region 4 bracket you have up, with Colorado Mines again. A decade ago when I was watching Westchester from the PSAC in the semifinals, that was a Super Region 1 team going against Super Region 2. So again, just reemphasizing your point, we'll see what the matchups are. Last year we saw from Super Region 1, the champion Shepherd having to travel out to Colorado Mines, and that one certainly did not go the way for the Shepherd Rams that day. But Colorado Mines, again, having a head coach that was there last year, super successful, moved on to the next level, and they just didn't miss a beat and had another great season, number 1 seed in Super Region 4.
What's kind of interesting here is that Mines actually gets paired up now with the only other seeded team remaining in this bracket, because we had 2 of the unseeded teams that won that now face each other. So theoretically, Mines gets the toughest draw here of the teams that are left. So that'll be a very interesting game in Golden, Colorado on Saturday. And now let's take a look at our home bracket. So we'll jump into Super Region 1. And Cary, I feel like we misled some folks last week because we were really excited about all these games, and we were really pumped up for it. We thought we were going to see some great action, and it didn't necessarily turn out that way. Charleston New Haven got pretty crazy in the fourth quarter. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's start with that game at the top. Slippery Rock hosting East Stroudsburg, coming off of that really tough loss in the PSAC championship. I have to think this was a really good way for them to respond to that.
Definitely. And it was very typical what we saw all the way leading up to that PSAC championship game. Very typical game for the Rock. 45 points, rush for 287, pass for 234. I think one of the biggest takeaways is they kept East Stroudsburg, which has a high-flying offense, certainly through the season. They kept them off the scoreboard. late in the game and only gave up 220 yards and one touchdown by the offense. And, I think it was pretty much, what we've seen throughout the year with Slippery Rock. Once they started to click, they just, poured on the points, and they scored the last 24 points in the game.
Yeah, great rebound win for the Rock. And I think that we kind of expected them to win that game, but I think 45-14 was not really the score that I was anticipating. The second game in this region, Charleston hosting New Haven. So, Cary, you and I were both at Kutztown on Saturday, and that game started an hour before the other two. So right around the time that game went to half, Charleston and New Haven, I think we're still kind of early in the first quarter. So I was watching a bit of this game while we were at the halftime at Kutztown and trying to check in with it periodically once we started the third quarter there until I saw that it was 17-0 and then 24-0, Charleston in the lead. And I thought, well, I think that's game over because 24 points is about as high as it goes for New Haven's offense on a good day. And I really thought that Charleston was probably going to be able to cruise home to a pretty comfy win. But boy, those Chargers really found something that they hadn't seen and hadn't done all year. 44 points, easily the most that they scored all year, and really were able to get themselves back into the contest here. I thought it was very impressive the way they were able to battle back. Really one of the things that made a big difference, they scored right at the end of the first half, got the ball to start the second half and scored again. So they went from 24-0 deficit to 24-14. That's a completely different football game. But one of the things then that really impressed me about Charleston in this is, you kind of expect a good team like New Haven is going to respond when they're in a deep hole, and they did. But after Charleston got those, or New Haven got those two scores to kind of get within 10 points, from there on, the rest of that game, every time New Haven looked like they were about to take some momentum, Charleston responded. They had an answer for every score after that, which is how we ended up with this escalated scoring battle late in the fourth quarter. But Charleston, really did a nice job reacting to what New Haven was doing. I don't think that they wanted it to end up a 52-44 game, but very impressive for both teams. So Charleston moves on, and they will host Kutztown. Cary, you and I were both at this game, as you mentioned earlier. Not really the game I expected to see, but a very impressive day for the Golden Bears.
Definitely. And I know when we were kind of talking in between timeouts, you were talking about Kutztown's ability to run between the tackles. And I said, Chuck, that they're running between the guards. I mean, I think, definitely have to shout out Kutztown's offensive line, what they were able to do, in pretty much dominating the defensive front of Virginia Union, and, running backs getting to that linebacker level and nobody touching them. I thought that was huge. On the flip side of it as well, Jada Byers obviously been a great back in Division II, and their ability to shut him down really. I talked about at one point, wide receiver for Kutztown, Mekhi Gibson, had an end around and had a jet sweep, and I was like, I think he has more yards at that point in the game rushing than Jada Byers did. So really, it starts up front, and Kutztown, just what we saw out of them in the PSAC championship game and what we saw last week, just incredible. And, definitely have some really good points to talk about with their matchup coming up this week. But that was just incredible. Those two sustained drives, the early scores there, and then getting the touchdown off the punt block, putting them up by those three scores early, just really put Virginia Union in a hole. And their strength, obviously, Virginia Union's their running game. So having to try and pass the ball, it was a tough task for them.
Yeah, I really wasn't very surprised that Kutztown had success stopping their offense. I really kind of expected that. We know how great their running game is. Jada Byers really is one of the best backs in the country, but there's not a whole lot else they can go to if a team is successful at slowing down that run game. And I kind of felt that Kutztown would be able to do that. I was actually much more impressed by Kutztown's ability to run the ball and move the ball pretty well against a very good Virginia Union defense. They're solid up front, and the Bears were just moving them off the ball and running that ball very successfully, like you said, right behind center. And then we saw some elements of some other things that Kutztown was able to do offensively that gave them just a little bit of added dimension. So I was very impressed by that, to be honest with you. I think it was 35-14 at the half. Bears only got a field goal in the second half. I think they were really just kind of managing the deficit at that point. This was a pretty one-sided win and a great performance for Kutztown. So the Bears now go to Charleston, Cary. I think this is a pretty good matchup. So let's take a look at that and see how they compare. I think this is pretty interesting because when you look at the offensive numbers, and we're going to look at Tiffin and Slippery Rock in a second, when you look at the offensive numbers, Kutztown doesn't really compare to the other three that are still left playing football, but boy, their defense makes a difference. But I see some things that are really interesting in the matchup here. How do you see this?
Definitely. And looking at the scoring offense, for the Kutztown Golden Bears, 24.5 points game. Again, they've only been given up an average of 14 points all year on defense. So they have not had to put up those big numbers. That said, I think their offense is just getting better. Again, their offensive line, what they showed in the championship game, what they showed last week against Virginia Union, and with Davis McNeil at running backs, been doing some really nice things. Ravenhill and Mekhi Gibson as the receivers. Husser, the tight end, had a touchdown catch last week. And but we talked about this with Judd Novak at quarterback. There's some mobile quarterbacks in the PSAC, but his composure that he has and his ability to extend plays, it doesn't ever look like it's just hectic, just messy. I mean, he's very poised when he does get outside the pocket to extend plays. Very smart, doesn't try to force a ball. And I think that offense is just getting better as the season's going on. And again, their defense under Coach Fargo, defensive coordinator, has just been lights out.
Yeah, I think Kutztown's offense can have a good day. Now, Charleston can play some defense. We can see that in the numbers. But I think Kutztown's offense can have a really good day. I think where I'm really excited is seeing that Bears defense go against a really explosive and diverse Charleston offense. The Golden Eagles, like some of the teams that Kutztown sees in the PSAC, thinking about East Stroudsburg a bit, Shepherd when they have it going, even Westchester from time to time. Those teams give you a lot of different looks. They're very diverse on offense, give you a lot of different sets, a lot of different things to prepare for. And Charleston's going to present that same kind of a challenge. There's a lot of things that they do well, almost a complete split between their productivity rushing and passing the ball. They have a couple of running backs that are really, really good players. In fact, their lead running back, Siobhan Wright, was the Mountain East Conference Offensive Player of the Year. Cary, he's coming off a 6-touchdown performance in that win over New Haven. A monster day for him, 6 rushing touchdowns, 1,000-yard rusher for the season. And he actually has a backup behind him, Alex Brink, who I think might even be a little bit more physical and more kind of that tough inside runner. He averages about 72 yards per game. So there's a really strong 1-2 punch behind a very sizable offensive line. We actually talked about that a little bit last week when we kind of broke down the New Haven matchup with them. Charleston's offensive line is very big and very powerful. I think they can be had if you're more athletic than them on the defensive front. New Haven had some success there, but I would say that battle was fairly even. So I think I'll be very interested to see how Kutztown can hold up to them. We know that they're very good at scheming, and I'm really interested to see how they can do against that offense. But there's a lot of experience there with Charleston. At the quarterback position, Javante Howard, really good player, about a 62% passer, 27 touchdowns for the season, a really good leader in that offense. Tay Marrero, their leading receiver for the season, also a very dangerous kick returner. We saw that from them also. So there's a lot that Kutztown will have to prepare for. This is a 10-1 conference championship team. Going against the Golden Bears at home. So by no means is this an easy road trip for Kutztown.
Just to follow up on that, again, we do have some very balanced, very diverse offenses in the PSAC, and Kutztown's played all of them this year. I think the biggest thing is looking back to that PSAC championship game and talking about the diversity with Slippery Rock's offense, both with the pass and the running game, multiple running backs, that can be in a lot of different situational, depending on what you need from them. And Kutztown shut them down. So again, it's not like for me, it's not a let's wait and see if they can do this. They've already proven it, time and time again with the top offenses, with the East Stroudsburgs, with the Shepherds, and the Slippery Rocks in the PSAC throughout the season. So I'm excited for this one. I think it's a great matchup, and I think the Golden Bears defense is certainly up for the challenge.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's an excellent point, Cary. They certainly have proven what they can do throughout the year, and I really like this matchup. All right, well, let's go on and look at our second matchup in the region. And boy, I'm excited about this one too, and I think you are as well. Until we had that result in the PSAC championship where Slippery Rock took that first loss of the season, we were really looking at these as the top two teams in the region. We were, anticipating that they would be the 1 and 2 seeds, possibly going either way. So we still get this matchup. It's a 1 and a 4 seed, but at this point, you can throw those numbers out the window. These are two really good football teams. So, Cary, all I see on the screen is a whole bunch of impressive numbers.
Absolutely. And, once they started releasing the top 10 in each of the super regions, and, at that point early on, Slippery Rock was still undefeated. And of course, being the PSAC guys, like, oh no, the Rock's number one, Rock's number one. And then, of course, with the little misstep there in the PSAC championship game, well, they had the loss, and Tiffin came in undefeated and got the number 1 seed. But these graphics you have, Chuck, the comparisons. I mean, this has a whole bunch of fun written all over it.
So one of the things that you've mentioned to me a couple of times throughout the year is that Slippery Rock tends to be a little bit of a slow starter. May not start that great, but boy, there's a point in the game where they just turn it on. And I think that's really interesting because I've watched several of Tiffin's games this year, and I've seen that trend with them a handful of times too, where they don't start poorly, but they don't really come out of the gate super fast. But something happens. Might be a turnover or a sack or just a big defensive stop, and then they just take the game over in a hurry. And it usually happens in the second quarter. And boy, then once they kind of seize the moment, they really kind of just race away from the opponent. So it sounds like we have kind of a similar trait there with these teams.
We saw it all season with Slippery Rock, with the exception of the PSAC championship game. It just never clicked in. And, I talk about it once it hits, and, it's usually sometime around, the second quarter. Sometimes it was the third quarter, but it's like the floodgates will just open. We saw it again last week with, Slippery Rock, scoring the last 24 points of the game. It's like they just, and again, I don't think it's necessarily anything the opposing teams are doing. It's just internally clicking. And again, when you look at it all starting up front, being an old offensive lineman, I look at that Slippery Rock offensive line. Those are all returning starters. It's a veteran group, and 4 out of the 5 were either first team or second team, all PSAC West, and it starts there. And then I get the diversity of the offense. You've got a quarterback, in Long, who is one of the nominees for the Harlan Hill Trophy, and you have an all PSAC West first team tight end, the first and third ranked receivers in the entire PSAC, of course, with Kyle Sheets, and the ability that he has to mismatch just about any D-back out there, and his ability to score touchdowns, and Cohen Russell, the third receiver. And then last week, I mean, we know they have 3 different options at running back. They had 4 different guys that ran the ball and scored touchdowns for them last week. They only had 1 through the air. It's just that veteran offensive line having 2 of the top 3 receivers in the entire PSAC, top tight end in the West, and the number one quarterback in the entire PSAC, Harlan Hill Trophy nominee with Braden Long. They just have so many different ways that they can, just hurt you. And, again, I think that was huge last week with just really, blanking East Stroudsburg for the entire second half of the game on defense. So I think it's a feeding frenzy. They both, just feed off of each other, the offense and the defense. But, only one time all year, the championship game where it just never kicked in. All the rest of the times it kicks in, and, they average, 42.7, they're in the 40s, every other game.
So I think that's another area, Cary, where we really kind of see these teams mirror each other a bit, because you were talking about how many different contributors Slippery Rock has had throughout the season, and that was really kind of very much on display last week. When you look at Tiffin and we break down their offense, there isn't one guy that you need to look at. There's a whole bunch of players who make this offense work. And of course, like with the Rock, it starts up front. The offensive line averages right around 300 pounds. Very defensive, a very experienced group, I wanted to say. I think it's 3 seniors and a junior up there. Very experienced offensive line that the Dragons have. And they've got 4 backs that they will use throughout the game. They've got 3 guys that have over 600 yards for the season. They have a 4th that's sitting just a couple of yards shy of 500. So, they're very comfortable with any of their running backs in the rotation. They will use all of them. Actually, they're guys who are 3rd and 4th in rushing yards are 1st and 2nd in rushing touchdowns. So they're very comfortable deploying a lot of weapons out of the backfield. They do tend to be a little bit more focused when they're throwing the ball. They've got one key target. Josh Lewis is kind of the star wide receiver for them. He's got 42 catches for the year. He's kind of the lead guy. But when they're running the ball, I can give you a couple names, but they're going to stand out. It could be any of them that really end up being the guy. Ronald Blackman is the player that leads the offense in rushing yards, but he may not be the guy who gets the most carries. It just kind of depends on who they think gives them the best matchup against Slippery Rock's defense. It might be Devin Nelson. He's got 752 yards for the year. It might be Tyrese Banks-Dorn, who actually leads the team in rushing touchdowns. So we're going to see a lot of different things out of this offense. The one thing to be aware of with Tiffin is that they did lose their opening day starter at quarterback. He was a grad transfer from Eastern New Mexico, I believe. Kason Martin. Unfortunately, he was injured in, I believe it was week 8 or 9. Missed the last couple games. Now, he has dressed. Actually, even appeared in the last 2 games, but I think it was really just to kind of give him an opportunity to go out and see how it feels. So I don't know if we'll see Kason Martin. His backup, Keegan Ray, has played very capably, but this feels like the kind of matchup, Cary, where you're going to have your best guy out there. And in these last couple games, even against a good Findlay team, they didn't have to ask a whole lot of the quarterback. I think this is the kind of game where they're going to need to ask a lot out of the quarterback position against Slippery Rock's defense.
The potential is definitely there. And again, if those floodgates start to open for Slippery Rock and they start going ahead 2, 3, potentially 4 scores, the passing game is definitely going to be a factor. I think, looking at this graphic, Chuck, one of the things that stands out to me, and this goes way back in football days, long before all the analytics that we have now, is look at that last one, the turnover margin. Plus 21 for Tiffin, plus 13 for Slippery Rock. Good teams have a great plus turnover ratio. There's just no doubt about it. And, with the one exception for Slippery Rock, of course, there's some fumbles along the way throughout the season, but, Braden Long only threw 2 interceptions throughout the first 10 games of the entire season and threw 3 interceptions in that PSAC championship game. That was a huge difference. So again, you can say, everybody says that, but again, you look at this plus 21, plus 13, that's going to be a big, who's going to play mistake-free football and who's not going to turn over the football, especially, like you said, the opportunity to possibly spark something for either team is who's not going to turn over the football at a very inopportune time, that's going to be the spark for the opponent. So that turnover margin, again, when you have teams that are getting this deep into the playoffs, that totally makes sense. You don't see teams that are minus 21 and minus 13 at this point of the season. So again, it's pretty simple, but ball security, take care of the ball, and hopefully you make some plays and are able to capitalize on that.
That plus 21 turnover margin for Tiffin is number one in the entire country. So they are the national leader in turnover margin, and they're actually second in takeaways as well. They've got 31 takeaways for the year. That's number 2 in the nation. Slippery Rock, I believe, is top 10 as well with that plus 13. So it certainly is a great looking matchup. Cary, one of the things I was able to do during the week was actually get a little bit of a conversation with a sitting head coach in the Great Midwest. And I was able to kind of talk to him about a couple things. And I asked him, what's it going to take to beat Tiffin? And what's the team going to have to do? And he gave me some talking points, but he also made it kind of simple. It's like, you have to run the ball and you have to stop the run. And I think that's one thing that Tiffin will probably really scheme to do, is try to run the ball. Slippery Rock has shown some vulnerability. We saw that with Kutztown, but we also saw it throughout the year. Even early started out last week, East Stroudsburg was having some success running the ball. So I would expect, especially if they are still going with their number 2 quarterback, who again is a very capable player, but he's not their starter. If they are going with their number 2 quarterback, I think you're going to see a very run-heavy game plan. Whether they'll be able to stick with that, we don't know, but I think we'll see a very run-heavy game plan to try to attack the Slippery Rock defense on the ground.
And I think when you look at the rushing defense number for Slippery Rock, that's a little misleading, because if you have a team that can really come out and establish the run, get sustained drives, and control the tempo of the game. So again, once those floodgates open, second quarter, the latest, the third quarter, they put up points so fast. Teams are playing from behind. They're not having the opportunity to run the ball. They have to pass the ball. So again, if you've got a team that can really ball security and be able to get those long sustained drives and keep the scoring down, that could be a recipe for success for Tiffin.
Yeah, I agree. I see a path there for both of those teams. So, all right. Well, let's kind of go back and look at the overall bracket again for Super Region 1. This is going to take us from 4 teams down to the regional final next week. We're going to have 2 teams battle out for the regional champion. Let's see, Cary, who do we like in these games? Let's start with Charleston and Kutztown. Who do you like to come out the winner in that one?
I've got to go with the PSAC East on this one. I got to go with the Kutztown Golden Bears.
I'm going to go with Kutztown as well. I think this can be a very tight game. I think that Charleston is a team that hasn't gotten a lot of attention all year, probably less than they deserved. I think they are very, very good. And I think this is a tough out for Kutztown, but I do think that they will get the win on the road in Charleston. Number 1 seed hosting the team that we thought was going to be up there as a 1 or a 2. They're coming into this as a 4. Slippery Rock at 11-1. Cary, who's your winner?
Chuck, I can't keep smiling because of the potential of where this is headed. I'm going to go with our PSAC West champion, Slippery Rock, in this one.
I'm going to go with the Rock as well. We probably both sound like PSAC homers because we've both been entrenched with the league for a long time. But of course, we have a lot of respect for the Mountain East and the GMAC and the Northeast 10 as well. But I do like Slippery Rock in this, and I do think that we're going to see again a little bit of an advantage to the Rock and Kutztown because of a little bit more depth within the conference. Just some of the teams that have kind of helped them prepare for these moments. I will say for Charleston, I think the Mountain East was probably as good as it's been in a long time. The Mountain East was very good this year. It was probably unfortunate that they didn't get a second team into the playoffs. That league was very deep and very, very good this year. The Great Midwest, not so much. And I think Tiffin probably didn't get a lot of attention because of when they caught some of their opponents in the schedule. Early in the year they played Ashland. We didn't really think a lot of Ashland at the time because they were 1-2. By the end of the year, Ohio Dominican just wasn't what they normally are. And I think Findlay was kind of just out of steam when they played them in the last week of the season. So, they played really well all year long. They've controlled everything that they can control, and they've been very impressive. But I do think that Slippery Rock has had some more opportunities to kind of face some adversity against good teams. And I think that's going to serve them really well and might make the difference against an extremely talented Tiffin team. So I guess we're both picking an all PSAC final. So if we're back here a week from now talking about a different game, we won't look so good, but we won't look so good. But we'll do it anyway because we're here for Super Region 1, and of course we're here to cover all the teams and all the conferences. So I think these are good looking games. Cary, I'll give you the last word. Anything else you want to say about our 2 games coming up this weekend?
Are we potentially, looking at deja vu here? So going back to Super Region 1 last year, you got to take a step back to that PSAC championship game. And again, for those who don't know, it flip-flops between the East and the West each year. So last year, the PSAC championship game was in the West. This year, it was in the East. So last year, IUP hosted that game, and they beat Shepherd. Both of those teams made it into the Super Region 1 bracket, obviously, at the different parts, and both ended up back in the Super Region 1 championship game with a different outcome. So in the PSAC championship game last year, we saw very much a game similar to what we saw with Kutztown and Slippery Rock this year, with IUP winning. And then when we got to the Super Region 1 championship game, of course, Shepherd won and went on to represent, in the semifinals, as we talked about earlier, going out to Super Region 4 and going out to Colorado Mines. So we potentially, if the Rock and Kutztown both win again this week, could have pretty much the same scenario where we had Kutztown, who won the PSAC championship game at home, versus Slippery Rock. Of course, Kutztown's a higher seed, so that means if both of these teams from the PSAC win this week, we could be looking at Slippery Rock coming back to Kutztown again, just like last year in the West with Shepherd going to IUP for the Super Region 1 playoff game. So, I'm about a half an hour from Kutztown. So for me, that would be incredible. And we could do another game, at Andre Reed Stadium. But I just think that's so amazing. It's, the potential for almost the exact opposite scenario as we had last season with Super Region 1 could potentially happen. Again, any given Saturday, Tiffin's certainly going to bring it. Charleston's certainly going to bring it. But if Slippery Rock and Kutztown both win their games this week, it'll make a very exciting Super Region 1 final with the Rock heading east again to Andre Reed Stadium in Kutztown.
Yeah, I can't imagine anything that Slippery Rock would like more than to get another shot at the Golden Bears after the experience that they had a couple of weeks ago. But Tiffin and Charleston will have their say before we can get to that moment because there's some tough games to be played this weekend. So, Cary, thanks for jumping on again to do this. It was a really good conversation. Hopefully, we did justice for all the teams and these games. I think we've got 2 really good ones coming up this weekend. So, just a reminder to follow us on all the socials. You can find our handles there. Cary and I are both very active on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling that these days. Be sure to watch Inside D2 Football on Sunday nights. You can find us there. Cary, thanks again for joining us, and we will be back again next week.
Happy Thanksgiving, Chuck, and just a couple days till game day.
All right. Thanks, Cary.